This is the United Podcast Network.
This is Voices in Validation, brought to you by IVT Network. IVT Network is your expert source for life science regulatory knowledge. Voices in Validation brings you the best in validation and compliance topics. We interview industry experts from pharma, biotech, med devices, and laboratories. Here is the host of Voices in Validation, Stacey.
Thank you, and welcome to another episode of Voices in Validation, brought to you by the IVT Network. Each week, we bring you timely interviews with life science experts with discussions focused on trending topics, frequently asked questions, and industry best practices. This week, I am pleased to bring you a panel discussion, and on our panel are Raechelle, Ken, Pritam, and Senthil. Welcome.
Thank you, Stacey.
Hi, everybody.
Thank you. Hi.
So this week, we are going to be talking about computer software assurance and an evolving risk-based quality approach. Because the FDA is set to launch a computer software assurance draft guidance later this year, attempting to clarify confusion around testing requirements, IT automation, risk, quality culture, and critical thinking mindset in the industry. But we'll also, I want to know from you guys, what that entails, but also, will it be delayed by COVID-19? What your thoughts are on that? Whether it is delayed or not, the COVID-19 crisis has certainly accelerated a culture shift as we're more dependent on the internet, IT, cloud systems than ever before. We'll discuss how organizations can and should take these principles into consideration and begin to use them, to modernize their legacy quality systems and programs now. That was a lot to say, but I think this is going to be an amazing discussion and really help clarify some of the confusion over what is the difference between current CSV and what's to come in computer software assurance. So, as I mentioned, the FDA's draft guidance is set to come out later this year, and it promotes a shift from software validation to computer software assurance. And for our listeners, let's provide a little background on the topic and why this change at this time. Raechelle, can I have you kick us off with that?
Sure. Thanks, Stacey, and thanks for having us. This is a great topic, something I'm very passionate about, and I'm really excited to be with this great panel.
Yes.
And CSA is all about changing the perception of validation and clarifying how to apply risk-based approaches. It's not really new or different regulations. It's really meant to reemphasize the importance of critical thinking, understanding the intended use of the system, and assessing risk based on impact, to patient safety, product quality, and data integrity. And it's really meant to ensure that that's driving the value-added documentation and testing, and we're not overdoing too much documentation and focusing on that documentation and for testing and such. So in my opinion, this is a perfect time to introduce CSA. I don't think COVID should delay that because, again, there's nothing new. This is more about trying to change the perception of validation, and it drives continuous improvement.
Sure.
It's really exciting times for CSV professionals.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Prita, you look like you have something to add to that.
Yeah. So Raechelle rightly said, right? What matters at the end of the day is quality of our product rather than traditional focus on how validation is documented. So perfect opportunity for us to start leveraging our vendor assessment programs within our companies. And what that gives you is really, you can see if you can accept vendor testing for, all the basic system functionality. As our industry has evolved, our vendors have evolved as well. And a lot of our software vendors have very sophisticated test tools, and they provide you executed test packages. So really great opportunity for us to start utilizing, leveraging those test packages and not necessarily re-execute all that testing in-house. The other aspect is, can we do some exploratory testing rather than spending time collecting test evidence, attaching that and all that good stuff? Can business user actually put the system through different business scenarios and ensure it's going to meet intended performance, right? And then lastly, you can have limited script testing only for those high-risk direct patient impact and product quality impact type of functions that are unique to your organization, that are customized for your organization. So, a great opportunity, again, for us to utilize our vendor management program and reduce all this documentation.
Absolutely. Thank you. Anybody else have anything to add on that first question?
Yeah, just a couple of points. Just to add on, fundamentally, why CSA is just to shift our focus from documentation-centric approach to what we really need to focus on. That is fundamental shift we need to think about. Think about how we have interpreted this for many years. And part of this is as a quality, I'm coming from a quality organization as well. We're also part of the problem. And we recognize that should not be the case going forward. And so we are voicing out and coming forward and explaining, we need to fundamentally shift our focus back to product quality and patient safety.
Right.
We need to take care of our business. We need to take care of our customers. And then regulation is a mathematic denominator.
Yeah.
Right? So what we're doing on, Ken, please.
Yeah. Back to the COVID comment. I think being on the CSA team, the fixed team, FDA industry, CSA team, I think the government is slower than COVID. I think that's the biggest factor with the shutdown, the restart, and it's just been an interesting exposure there. But I do want to echo one thing that first time I heard Cisco Vicente talk was that, everything that we're doing, nothing is outside of current regulation. It's a matter of clarifying misunderstandings and moving forward. So everything that is in CSA, you can already do.
Sure.
I think that's a key point.
And I think that's an important point. A lot of times when we see new guidances come out, they're just a new version of an older document quite frequently. And the purpose of them is to clarify and maybe break things down further if necessary. So I think that's reasonable to expect that this particular document will do the same. But to Senthil's point, I think it's very important for the listeners to understand that really the focus is going from, hey, let's check off all the boxes to make sure we're compliant to, our focus really is on the end result, meeting the patient need, and having the highest quality product that we can provide. So,
absolutely.
Yeah, that's what I expect here. And it sounds like you guys are all in agreement with that. So then who is responsible for this shift? Because we're talking about, even though maybe some of the activities under guidance won't be changing that much, there's definitely a mindset shift and other things that are going to happen. So who's responsible for this shift? And does it become an IT initiative or a function of the QA team? Pritam, can you lead us off, please?
Absolutely. Yeah. So this is a process change. This is a culture change. And like you said, mindset shift. And IT and QA absolutely have to work in collaboration to make CSA a success. IT and quality, we own the processes, and we absolutely have to be on the same page, completely aligned every step of the way during system implementations. Apart from IT and quality collaboration, I also think business plays important role as well. Because at the end of the day, we are releasing this system for business use, and that intended use is what our focus is. So, business contribution is also key to make CSA a success.
Excellent. Yeah. So it's got to be a team approach, for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, I agree with Pritam on that. So just to expand on that with respect to partnership, it's a cultural change, definitely a big cultural change we need to go through. And many teams within IT and quality and within multiple functions within quality. Right? There are audit teams, there are contract teams, vendor oversight teams. So we need to work with many aisles and also along with the business. But I think that's what Ken and I are doing because we are exactly partnering each other. So I'm providing quality oversight and he's driving the process narrative with respect to how we need to really shift from validation to assurance approach. right? I think it's definitely a partnership, and we definitely the quality culture needs to be inbuilt, and however we want to approach with respect to the senior leadership, the focus should be back to product quality and patient safety, and that is going to be a conversation we need to work putting every time, because the reason is we have so ingrained into our brain that this is how we should be doing CSV.
Right.
So it's not an easy task. So we need to maybe over-communicate, maybe use the same words repetitively, just to make sure that it is getting onto the heads and getting onto the mind, and start the shift towards it.
Absolutely. Thank you. Anybody else have something to add on that particular point?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, IT and quality have to work together and they have to partner. It won't happen otherwise. And they need to propel CSA. It's a transformation, right? There's to keep up with digital transformation that's taking place throughout the industry. And the value that IT and quality will provide in this space is to help clear the way for innovation without compromising quality. That's really our goal and the value that we can provide. And we have to do it together in partnership.
Excellent. And pharma definitely needs to be, innovating, because we're always looking for new products, new ways to use our old products, and obviously bringing technologies in and embracing them more fully is on the front of most people's mind in the industry these days. Ken, before we move on,
the only point I would add is that it needs to be owned by IT and quality. You need to identify the true change agents within the organizations in that partnership. Like Senthil and I were both progressive. We've both been, I've been in quality, I've been in validation, I've been on both sides of the fence. We partner well. You need to have someone who is equally progressive. You need to influence that one person so you can create that reference model. I deal with 4 quality assurance units.
Sure.
And they're at different degrees and moving forward, but you need, this is an opportunity truly where the regulators and GAMP are saying, go ahead, make this change. They're embracing it.
Right.
And we're realizing in all these sessions that industry is the most conservative, not the regulators, not the industry groups.
Right.
Individual people are just stuck in doing it the way that they've always done it. So you have to convince one person. And that's like Senthil and I, we got together and he came aboard, then expand as you go, create reference models and show.
And I think that's great, Ken, because it's going to take teams of folks like you to really show that it can work and lead the way. And I think that, over time, we'll definitely see more and more companies and organizations shifting with the tides. So I thank you both for being, sort of the leaders in this, because it is important for the growth of the industry. And of course, ultimately the quality that we provide to our patients. So with this, if the intent then is to improve quality, and then reduce validation cost and time and decrease testing documentation, because we're not so focused on that anymore, and really deliver value to the patient much faster, how do you see us transitioning to a process that enables critical thinking, to not only ensure product quality, as we've mentioned, but more importantly, patient safety, which is at the end of the day, our goal ultimately? Ken, can you start us off with that?
Sure. I think I can, I'll speak to our journey that we have embarked on and how we went there. But I think that the fundamental thing is, is it the stack of screenshots that is most important for patient safety, product quality? Or is it actually that you spent that time testing the system and ensuring that it actually works? Which is more important? And that stack of screenshots, it almost never sees the light of day. When a regulatory agency comes in and they say, show me, they don't say, show me the test documentation. They say, show me in production the audit trail for this transaction.
Right.
I want to see. But they don't go to the test documentation unless they're saying your entire program doesn't work. But to ensure that your program works, you need to spend your time testing the system.
Right.
So it's a fundamental shift in there. What is the most important for patient safety? The stack of papers or a reduced set of papers that focuses on the high-risk areas and demonstrates that all of those are met. So what we did when we started this journey is we came up with models. And we took it and then we retrospectively applied it to systems. And then we were able to demonstrate that with these revised models, that there would be no risk to patient safety, product quality, that we would have caught everything. That on the areas where we had reduced documentations, we took we wouldn't see issues, and we had coverage. And it was very interesting because after the analysis, we found some other related areas where we said, like, hey, we need to make some process changes to make it more robust. So that creating that data enabled us to move forward. The agency is very we reached out to Cisco and, said like, hey, I said, I need your support. And just by having him willing to come support allowed us to change people's perceptions and move the needle forward. So as you do it, I think there's always going to need a basis for empirical data. The conversation needs to be tailored for everyone. But if you really bring it back down to what is important for patient safety, what is important for product quality, the application of critical thinking, is it the generation of more screenshots, which is the absence of critical thinking?
Right.
If all I has is a hammer, everything looks like a nail from Maslow, then I would just end up creating everything, and everything is high risk. And then I take a risk-based approach and I have a miss. Well, then now I need to do more.
Right.
And they say you open up a deviation. I said, even though you've already accepted the possibility of a risk, so it's not a deviation. So it's one of these things where you need to take a step back and really apply that critical thinking and take people, with compassion, because we're changing the world. The world has really walked in 1993 thinking of software engineering, and everything else has changed.
Absolutely. And I think it is important that that we are focused on critical thinking, as you said, but I know someone else can speak to it, how we really get there, because it does seem to be that is a big challenge for some organizations. Not maybe an understanding that they need to use critical thinking, but actually getting to the point where that's their first response, right? It's second nature. Anybody else want to speak to that particular topic? All right, excellent. So we know that obviously we're going to be focused more on quality and less documentation. How are we reducing the documentation? And when documentation is needed for compliance, what exactly should we expect then with this new mindset or cultural shift? Senthil, I'm going to let you kick us off.
Sure. I mean, this is probably more of an extension of what Ken just mentioned. I think talk about critical thinking, because the CSAs largely focus on how we actually going to document. And testing is definitely a big key here. We need to test more as much as possible and apply critical thinking. And then our focus of documentation. Let's take one step back. Why are we needing the documentation in the first place? Right? To confirm, the intended use is expected. Right, and also to defend ourselves that we have gone through the regulation, we have looked into, we perform our due diligence, right? Whether it's identify the risk, mitigate procedural or technical, and it's just purely from a defense standpoint. We need to make sure that we have necessary documentation available. But how we have done and how we approached so far, we created an animal out of it. I'll give a small. This happened pretty recently, maybe a week or 2 weeks ago. A team is trying to work on a simple workflow-based product. And they came to me and they presented to me that this is what the product is going to be. But they're largely talking about what is the IQ, what is the OQ, and what is the PQ related to that. The first question back to them is, do they have the solution in hand? They did not even have a solution in hand yet. Right? So that means they are thinking fundamentally wired in such a way that before even have a solution in hand, before even thinking about product quality or data integrity, they're thinking about documentation. And this is what we want to shift away from. Focus on that first, right? And then if you understand the risk, then based on the type of risk, we can document it appropriately. And also there are different types of testing techniques available, and that's one of the key pillar from CSA is it is allowing us to use ad hoc testing, unscripted testing, and scripted testing models, which is never heard of from a regulator. Right? How many times you have seen? We might have seen Ken might call that is say from the other testing conferences, right? There are modern testing tools available. But from the pharmaceutical world, who has talked about these kinds of testing techniques in the past? Right? So we need to embrace the modernization. I think that's what Raechelle touched on, the digitization. Right? How we can actually work towards that whole digitization era. We are going through the transformation, and we need to enable this. Right? And for that, the documentation needs to focus on what is absolutely needed, and it should be commensurate with risk.
Okay. Yes. Right. Absolutely. And Pritam, do you have something to add to that? Can't hear you. Oh.
Oops, I'm sorry. Yeah, so this is an interesting question, right? And I think it stems from the previous thinking of if you didn't document it, it didn't happen. That's a common statement that's made during validation. And I just want to re-emphasize on CSA is not saying don't document things. CSA is really simply telling us there are different ways to document it. And the focus shouldn't be on producing the amount of documentation they produce, but rather shift that focus to ensuring the product quality, patient safety, and data integrity like we talked about. So, yeah.
So it's being more efficient with your documentation process and making sure that it is definitely connected to the quality and based on the risk factors, yes?
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
So one thing to close this out, to add to this. So think about validation. If you're a small company, right, learning management system, let's say UL engineering, you risk assess the entire thing away. It's a SaaS service provider. I'm not going to do any testing. That's compliant. You're a big pharma. You're risk adverse. You generate 20 volumes for something that the other company just risk assessed away. That is compliant.
Right.
So you think about a validation package. Think about it, the criticality of the record itself. You could take a system and do a retrospective validation. You can't do that to product. You can't do that to the drug, to the biologics, to the device. It is a record that inherently has a lower risk because so you have the flexibility in those low risk records to do it. So as Pritam was pointing out, you have the flexibility to say like, hey, it's just like in manufacturing. Like when I write down the pH of a batch, I will sit there and I'll say it's 7.15. And I'll just write it. I don't take a picture of the pH meter or do anything. But let's say I've got a filter that does a sterile filtration of the final product. That filter, probably that integrity test strip, I will take that and I will attach that to the record because that's critical to the sterility.
Exactly.
So you have that pH meter, that's an affidavit. So what we're saying is you don't need a screenshot. You can say, I did it. These low risk, I did it. And with the most purest in CSA, you just look at what either the vendor did or what you internally did in your test cycles to demonstrate that the system is fit for purpose. Even though those cycles don't have your QA oversight, the question was, was it done compliantly? Or was it, the incorrect testing? So as long as it's the correct testing, all you need is a single line in your SOP that says like, hey, we are going to leverage this prior activities. Mm-hmm. And at the point of leveraging, right, for example, you can do with a trace matrix, that's when you start applying GDP principles, GXP principles as documented in there. So just something to think about. What is most important? And we have the flexibility within the current space to be compliant. And you can back it up with metrics as well and other different ways and different controls.
Absolutely. And I think the regulators, are vague in their guidances on purpose because they, while they want you to be compliant with very important factors that are, that do result in the quality, they don't want to tell you how to do it because everybody's way is going to be different. But certainly, what you're talking about, Ken, is much more efficient, and it's going to get the product to the patient much faster. But still, we are concerned with the quality. Raechelle, did you have something to add here?
Yeah, the only thing I'll say is technology has also evolved a lot. right, over 20 years. So
Absolutely.
just like technology has evolved, we have a lot more COTS systems, we have low coding platforms. We also have to evolve how we validate, right? And that's, to me, the whole purpose of the CSA and these new technologies, tools, taking advantage of the automation out there, to kind of be lock in step with the fact that technology is rapidly changing.
Absolutely.
Right.
And then, so,
Yeah.
and I'm sorry. And what I'm hearing from all of you is that, as you say, risk-based over and over again, is that really inherent in the CSA is this risk-based documentation. So the things that are deemed to be much more important are going to get priority, right? And there are certain things that just really don't need to be documented to death here. So some companies may think they're risk-based already because this is not new terminology, as you mentioned at the very beginning, and everybody's started to shift to this risk-based approach in life sciences. But for those that think they're already risk-based, but are they really? So I'm wondering, walk us through this process. And can you talk about the evolution of CSV professionals? Because we've talked about the documentation, we've talked a little about the processes, but the professionals, because I'm just wondering how we're going to get over the hump here. So Ken, if you can talk to us a little bit about that, how these professionals need to shift to approach computer systems differently under this new way of thinking.
Yeah. So, but even before I go there, to your first point, right? Whether they're risk-based already or not, most companies aren't. Right? They blindly apply tables, and then they use those tables to justify the level of effort, as opposed to applying risk properly, and to drive what activities they're going to do. They reverse it and say, I don't want to test as much, so I will manipulate the risk scores, or they'll do it, and they're really missing the essence. And then fundamentally, when a miss occurs in an area that you've risk assessed away, a lot of companies, they'll open up a deviation, even though it's not a deviation from the protocol, because you already said, I'm okay with a miss there. So what ends up happening, and this I see all the time, especially the larger companies who have the luxury, they could throw more money at stuff. They do the risk assessments, they do all the testing, and then they have a miss, then they still make them do more testing. So you get doubly punished, right? You still have to do a risk assessment and still test everything in the end after a couple releases.
Right.
So it is an interesting phenomenon. So I don't know if it's Senthil or Raechelle who made the comment that it was 20 years. I think it was Raechelle. We're behind. I think they both talked about we're really behind where testing is in the rest of the world. So the evolution of the CSE professional is to actually take a step back and understand modern testing. If you go to any modern testing conference and you talk with them, they'll look at you like you're crazy if you say you take screenshots for positives, right? For a positive case that passed. It's like, why? There is no value. And the only time you'll ever find someone who does that is they're saying hey, there's a justification. I need a baseline for a purpose. There's a separate business intent for that, as opposed to showing that something works. And you really look at modern testing, and you look at the purpose of testing is not to prove that something works. It is actually the detection of defects, the reduction of risk, that you can make an informed decision, right? You build it in, you test early in agile methodologies, and you find the defects before they're even created through requirements review, involving the testers to say, hey, there's a condition you haven't thought of. So you prevent them. During the test cycles, you detect them. But at each point, you can make a decision on, hey, should we proceed or not proceed? As opposed to what we do now, which is just a blind application of protocols, which also assumes a uniform distribution of defects, which is not true. There's always one module that has more defects. It's non-uniform. You go to ISTQB, largest testing organization in the world, it's one of their key principles. That defects aren't uniformly distributed when the system is released.
Sure.
So how you get there, what I'm saying is you need to go to the testing conferences. You don't go to another validation conference, right? And I've gone to several, and I've heard people talk about CSA who don't understand CSA.
Right.
and they just talk about GAMP, M3, and application of risk tables, and that misses the whole point. Right? You need to, Pritam mentioned exploratory testing. I went to 2 testing conferences, and in 2 different sessions, they asked, what is the most effective way of testing? They said exploratory testing, which is a completely unscripted methodology. You learn the system, you play with the system, and then you start considering scenarios, and you expand. And so as you learn the system, you start saying, okay, I'm going to check this scenario, this scenario, this scenario. And that was considered in rooms which, had probably 60 each, so more than 100 testing professionals, saying a completely undocumented way of testing from the way that we would document from screenshot is the most effective and efficient. And I argue the case that what is most effective and what is most efficient at removing defects is in the best interest of patient safety and product quality.
I would agree 100%. I would say that we're at the very beginning of beginning stages of most professionals in this industry understanding that, because it's not done that way the majority of the time. Would you agree? At this point in time, yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, so you need to have an advanced grip. You need a quality partner who's progressive. I have Senthil, and we partner.
Exactly.
But another way you just jarred my memory is there are certain things, like for example, my entire validation team, I have them go to take a ISTQB, foundational level certification in testing, so that they could understand the terminology, they had a consistent vocabulary, and so when they go out to these various conferences or webcasts, they can understand what they're talking about. I think that is a good starting point for establishing a base level of knowledge, so you can understand what they're saying and then learn. If you just go to a conference, you'll probably, they're talking about advanced concepts, and you're not going to get it. It'll be very difficult from a Val resource just to jump into that and learn. So there are different routes that you can go about this.
Excellent. I think that's great to talk about testing conferences, because I think a lot of folks in quality and validation and compliance, they get stuck in the old patterns of doing things, and they continue to go to the same types of training. And it sounds like it's going to take a very different kind of training and a very different type of understanding to move them to the next level in terms of this particular CSA effort.
Yeah,
and there are different ways, because we did talk about partnering with IVT and another group to talk about bringing a testing session.
Yeah.
So kind of like a foundational and a customization,
right,
a subset to help people along that journey and create with IVT a sort of roadmap.
Yeah, no, we would definitely love to do that. We would definitely love to partner with you on that. I think it's very important, and it's in terms of this sector of the industry, it is cutting edge because so many people aren't getting it yet, and they need to. Raechelle?
In addition to testing, it's also recognizing the different methodologies, waterfall versus agile as well, educating, taking courses on that too, on the agile and the iterative type cycles and approaches and what that means, how you can do that in a controlled, compliant manner. Again, CSA has now opened the door, right? They're opened the door to say, think about new ways of implementing your systems and testing your systems and documenting. And what is a requirement? Can a requirement be a use case scenario, which you then go all the way through to your automated testing? So really learning those, that's another training or another, conferences to go to as well, is understand that, because everybody is very, used to the waterfall. Everyone's comfortable with that. But I think there's ways, there's definitely ways you could be compliant if, with the agile, and people are starting to do it. Other industries have done it. So again, we are behind for some reason. So that's another way that people can evolve. And again, this is a new era. This to me could be a way that you can grow, in terms of learning these new tools, learning these new methodologies that other industries are even using. So to me, I think people should be really excited and energized by it, because this is, to me, I don't think we have seen this before. People said, I'm in validation. This to me is like getting to another level. And I think it's really exciting.
Yeah, no, I agree. I definitely think you're right there. And we as an industry need to be a little bit more progressive in the ways that we think about these things, and the way we embrace technologies too, to your point. But this is as we've been discussing, this is really a big shift then, thought shift for industry professionals, because they're really moving from a compliance-centric mindset to a quality-focused culture, as we've already discussed. I'm hoping that Senthil and Pritam, what does this look like in practice? Can you share with us? This shift. How do we get there? What does it look like?
Yes, I mean, this is, again, as I said, it's a fundamental shift. But what I tell to my team is actually many conversations as well. It's an organizational change for everyone. That's the way I'm actually putting it on the table. It is just not for my team. It is for everyone in this together. Even the delivery team are used to certain approach with respect to validation, right? Even the validation team are used to it. Quality organizations also used to it. And business teams are definitely also used to the same approach. So it's an OCM in a way. But fundamentally, the way I'm actually positioning it is the compliance will become a byproduct if you focus more on the quality and focus more on the business, focus more on the customer. Then compliance and regulatory requirement is automatically a denominator. And that's pretty much it. Because if I'm not taking care of my business, if I'm not taking care of my customer, right? So there is no point in having bundles of screenshots. Right.
So, if you have no customers, you don't need the screenshots.
Exactly. And
Absolutely.
And also, I don't want an audit or inspection to show that the quality of the product. Right. The quality of the product should be surfaced right away. I think there are a lot of literatures coming out with respect to future state of pharmaceutical quality. There's one article that was published by, I think his name is Lawrence Yu. He published in 2017, and the way he's projecting, which is pretty much with respect to pharmaceutical quality, is we have to really establish an enhanced control where the real-time monitoring is the way to go. And with the technologies that are floating around, we need to go towards real-time monitoring. We don't need to wait for, we should not be leveraging the point-in-time documentation. And even the testing or scripts, that is great to have. Definitely we need to have, no doubt about that. But we need to really go fast. How we can actually get the real-time monitoring done so that we know the issues before the issue can happen. Whether it's a device, whether it's a manufacturing product, or anything related to patient safety. But how we can go there, it's a cultural shift, focus more on your core components, rather the compliance mindset. That's why if you really think about it, in a simple way, focus on your business, focus on your customer, and then the regulatory requirement will follow automatically.
Well said.
Thank you. Yeah. So I just want to add one thing, Stacey. It's a mind shift, like Senthil said, and he summarized it really, really well. What gets people thinking really is, take a step back and see, what does compliance mean? Compliance, as the term indicates, you're meeting the regulation. Mm-hmm. And what does quality mean? Quality really means delivering your service, process, and product that meets your intended performance. So, like Senthil said, if you achieve quality, compliance is just byproduct of quality. That's going to come automatically. And that really gets people thinking then, yes, I have to be quality centric and I have to focus on my customers and my business. And we have to get things done the most efficient way and really invest time in doing what matters.
Absolutely.
So one thing to just add to that, the reverse, right? If you start with a compliance-centric mindset, you tend to make issues that aren't really compliance issues, processes that have no basis in regulation, there's no predicate rule, and you begin hurting your ability to actually have quality because you've now taken non-GXP processes and you try to make them GXP processes. And that's one of the reasons why we can't move forward in our sector. And the risk is that we lose the agility to keep up. If you look at it from a cybersecurity perspective, right? The anti-malware companies, all the cybersecurities, they can't keep up with the hackers. Now you throw validation on top of that, how can we possibly keep up?
Right.
And what is, again, best for patient safety, product quality? So to switch to the quality mindset, as Pritam was saying, and Senthil earlier, that is key. And then compliance, if you're really looking at it, like when we talked about leveraging, we actually talked to agency to use our prior testing. They're just one line in your SOP. Just tell us you're going to do it. And then it's compliant. We don't need to understand the nitty-gritty details, right? You're going to do what you need to do to make sure that that system is fit for purpose. That is not a compliance expectation.
Right. And if you're moving along and everything is going well, you're having positive results and your product is coming out the way you want it to, then as you mentioned before, the steps you took to get there are kind of irrelevant at that point because you have the forward motion.
It's funny, just saying real quick, sorry, is I remember when Pritam and I updated our processes to say we're going to leverage vendor testing, people are like, what? And it's like, again, we want to focus on the right test and not redo what we don't have to redo. And it was like everybody was shocked. And at first people were very resistant, but we worked it through. But, here's, again, quality and validation groups or IT partnering together to update and say, yes, you can. And we still had to. So it's funny, Ken, like you're saying that, take advantage of the vendor testing. Don't redo what you don't have to redo, things like that. And we have to be the ones that spearhead it. IT and quality together have to do that together.
No, and I'm glad you brought that up because I think that's very important. And leveraging other validation activities and avoiding redundancies in the process is super important to this whole concept that you're talking about. So, Raechelle and Ken, I'm going to direct this to both of you. What systems and tools then align with this new methodology, right? So leveraging the data that's already out there and really avoiding those redundancies. Raechelle, do you want to kick us off with that one?
So I guess some tools, I think we were talking a little bit we talked about the modernized testing, some tools like Agile. There are tools out there like Jira and Confluence. There's testing tools out there like Tricentis, and Ken is probably much more geared to talking about other testing tools that is definitely an expertise in there. But those are some tools that are already out there. A lot of industries are already using it. There's a lot of plugins and such. So those are some tools that people should be looking at. They're becoming almost like industry standards and such. But there are other tools as well, but those are pretty popular. Another tool that I'm actually very, that to me a light bulb went off is that you might have a lot of different tools that are doing a lot of different things, but what is tying it together? Because somebody like myself, I don't want to maybe be an expert in Jira or an expert in all these different testing tools, but as a CSV professional or quality professional, I need to go in and be able to review the test results and such. And there's tools out there like this Vera that kind of ties things together. And it's a way that, I could quickly, or the business can go in, review and approve, not know what these other tools are, but that could be your official record of them agreeing to the content, the test results, or the user requirements or use cases. So those are some tools out there that people could begin looking at to help enable automation.
Excellent. And it sounds like they're readily available. They're not new and emerging tools. They're things that are currently out there that people should be familiar with?
The Jira, Confluence, and definitely Tricentis is also a big name. I think more people are. Vera is not as much, but it's starting to come out there, and it's more plug-in for those tools. It's something that's kind of trying to tie. But those few ones, I'm sure everybody here has heard those. And again, Ken could probably mention many more.
So at the highest level, though, there are plenty of tools.
Right.
You're just looking across industry. There are directories of services, and it's just establishing which one you're going to do.
Yeah.
We are a micro-focus house, so we use them for our test case management system. We use them for our performance testing, our mobile testing, for our automation. We have UFT. We also use, say, Selenium. We use other services. So there's a Apply Tools, which does a visual comparison. So we could do a regression. So you have a screen, you update the system, it could do another comparison, and uses AI. So it's not like a pixel level. It uses fuzzy logic, so it can compare and say like, hey, these have changed or these have not changed in a meaningful way, which enables us to add automation. And in some of our cycles, right, we built in, so we used a turnkey for our ERP upgrade. It's kind of like Tricentis, but different flavor. Tricentis was more originally SAP. Turnkey was more Oracle, EBS. And we basically, during our implementation cycle, we automated stuff so we could constantly use it throughout our system, right? Throughout our SDLC. We do a release, we can do end-to-end testing with it, we could do it again and again. So it's an automate first approach as opposed to doing it. I think the one thing that you need to, because there are plenty of tools, so you can't just go on a buying spree. You need to think about what is the value, even in regression.
Right.
If you automate, there's a maintenance cost and overhead. Like one of the interesting things to go to a testing conference, one of the things that the last one I was at that I took away was everyone was talking about how they automated too much. Yeah. And now that they had this whole burden and now they're pulling back. So we have the luxury to look back at 20 years of history in other sectors and kind of see what are the best practices, what were the gotchas. So here, we consciously make a decision. What is the ROI for this automation? Is the system really going to change? How much does it change? Is this going to be meaningful? And of those, that's how we track our metrics for automation. We ignore everything else that's no value in our calculation because we'll never do them. We only look, this is valuable. So it's to really look at the business value for what you're doing and then apply it. Does it make sense to you? Much like CSA is saying, do what you need to do to make sure that system works for you. Similarly for the tools, make sure you get the tools that work for you because there's plenty. Right. You could just rattle on innumerable numbers.
Yeah, we don't have to mention them all here. I mean, it sounds like, you just, as an organization, really need to understand what your goals are, where your needs are, and what tools are going to best provide the information and the outcomes that you need.
And it can be overwhelming, Stacey. You summarized it great. And I think sometimes people can get overwhelmed. You look at the list and and some of it you're like, I can't even believe Cucumber is called a tool. So I mean, for agile and stuff, but so it can be a little overwhelming. And that to me is where, again, the industry needs to come together, network, connect, find out what's working in other places. I don't think we all have to be in alone.
I definitely agree. I think, we started out this whole conversation by talking about the team approach, and I think it still applies at this stage of the game. So we've talked then, obviously, a lot of what we're talking about in CSA is creating efficiencies, right? And not just doing, 1,000 steps to get somewhere where you could have been in 10 steps. And so from these efficiencies gained from the quality-focused culture, then, does it lessen the demands on CSV teams in terms of all of the manual things that they're doing, the documentation, et cetera, and allow for more focus time on higher priority tasks? Maybe Pritam and Senthil, you can talk a little bit about why that's such an important outcome of this CSA guidance.
Sure. Yeah. So if you think about it, right, look, traditionally CSV teams have been really focused on, they spend a lot of time testing the systems, collecting test evidence, reviewing all that test packages. And then there are some human errors. Somebody forgot to take screenshots. Somebody forgot to label. And that creates this whole churn of activities. And we spend a lot of time making sure that documentation is looking perfect. And sure, at the end of the day, you may have very good looking validation package. But meanwhile, those activities and the time spent has absolutely made no impact on your product quality and patient safety. And that's really why it's absolutely high time that we relieve our team from this busy work of collecting documentation and utilize that time that's freed up now and invest that time to understanding system, identifying those critical functionalities, and really focus on doing what's going to add value for your organization.
Oh, absolutely. Complete in agreement with Pritam there. So the couple of things which I thought of adding is freeing the time, definitely reviewing the documentation if it is not really adding value. But how I'm actually foreseeing is we, as a quality organization, we need to look at the risk, right? And then apply the critical thinking up front so we can spend more time in looking at the risk, look at the key process indicators and key risk indicators so that we can appropriately mitigate the risk at the right level. Right now, how the quality, at least in the CSV area, we focus too much on testing. And particularly, not only testing, how we document the testing.
Right.
That we need to shift the focus from documenting the testing to the risk areas, work on, just the way Pritam mentioned, identify the risk areas, and also shift more towards what is the due diligence we should perform at the vendor level, right? So we should shift. There are so many areas we can see risk there, but we could not spend time as much as we would like to because we are spending too much time on reviewing or documenting the testing itself. But the technology is actually really evolved. There are better ways to get the verification done from the technology. And so we should focus, at least from the quality mindset, we should focus more towards identifying the risk, work towards vendor due diligence, and particularly with respect to contracts, right? How we write contracts, because we are doing a lot about. So there are areas of interest, at least from the quality side, that we should be focusing more.
And that makes total sense. And I'm just left thinking, so obviously, as we've mentioned, this is a big shift for some in the industry. Ken, you and Senthil are leading the way here in some respects on some of this movement. So what would you say are, where do we go from here? What are some of the next or first steps as organizations transition to this new approach?
I think, it goes back to, you need a partner, right? Senthil is my partner. He is progressive. He understands. And, for me, I got 4 different quality partners, 2, Senthil being the most on board, another also being on board. And you need to, when you're making change, you need to have thick skin. I'm just going to be honest. Because whenever you partner with someone and the others aren't in alignment, they'll say you're quality shopping or you're doing this and you're doing that. And it really is like, whenever the first person to make a change, you have to be bold. You have to stay committed, and you need to be compassionate, because the people who are saying what they're saying is just because of the lack of understanding. And they need to be brought forward to do it. Now, I do really emphasize that you need to find that one partner, because you need to create the documentation such that the others can see it and understand it, versus an abstract conversation. If we do this, this is the right way to do it. No, the others, they need to see data. It's a chicken and egg concept. So you have to find that one partner, and you have to move it forward, regardless of how that is, perceived, and be willing to take that data and just showcase it. And once you do that, then you can get the others to move. The flip side, if you try to put everyone in a room, what ends up happening is no one wants to take that step forward. And it becomes this whole conversation about how we've always done it this way, and this is the only way we can do it. Or you get let's say you get a 5% different change when you really could have got a 50% or a 60% change. And everyone here, one of the key things about, we talk about efficiency. The intent of efficiency and everything else is to give us more time to do what we need to do to make sure that system is fit for purpose. That is always that goal. It's not about, hey, I've got, someone forgot to fill out a step, and no, that's not a deviation. Someone forgot to attach a screenshot. That's a deviation. And the thing that always, I started in manufacturing, right? Direct product impact, like I'm making,
right,
growing the cells that will make the drugs. And if we didn't fill something out, we just said late entry. Yes, I did this. And we just put initial and date, LE, late entry. We come back, we sign data. No deviation, no nothing. An attachment's missing. We print it out, we attach it. We put the contemporaneous data when we attach it. Doesn't trigger a deviation. Yet in the val cycle, it's like I look at stuff that has, again, like I said, you can risk assess its existence away. You can retrospectively create it. You can't do the manufacturing. We have more controls and more conservatism in the validation space than we have in the manufacturing space. So it's just a fascinating state that we've ended in.
Thank you, Ken. So we are running short on time, but definitely to summarize that, it just sounds like the next steps are really to come up with a plan, find your partner, and maybe attend one of these testing seminars, webinars, whatever people are doing here during COVID-19, so that you can gain more knowledge on this process and start to take small steps. Excellent. Well, we've learned so much today. I know we're short on time. I just want to, in closing, see if you have one additional thought or tip to share before we end for the day. Raechelle?
Yeah, I mean, basically, I just hope that after this podcast, the listeners are encouraged to do more research about CSA and different automation tools, attend seminars, network and connect with others, share ideas. This is a way to start the conversations, move the needle, and reinvent the way we work. I think that's really key. And we have to do this together as an industry. And I think, Ken, this is a mindset change. It's about people, process, and technology. And this, CSV professionals, we want to do the right thing. This is just an evolution to the next era. So thank you, Stacey, for hosting this. And thank you, Pritam and Senthil and Ken. Really, I even learned a lot from this podcast. So I just wanted to thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I want to say thank you to all of you, our guests, for sharing your expertise and knowledge with our listeners. I know we could say a lot more today, and perhaps we'll schedule another conversation in the future to talk a little bit more about this in practice. But for today, this was amazing. I thank you all for sharing your expertise with us and appreciate you spending the time that it took here today. Also want to give a big thank you to our producer, Ben Kitchen, and the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. Lastly, a big thank you to you, our valued listeners. If you have topic requests or guest suggestions, we'd love to hear from you. And if you enjoyed this episode, we ask you to subscribe in your podcast player of choice and share with your friends, colleagues, and online networks. That helps us grow and get more great information out to the audience. For today's show notes and information on this podcast, please do visit www.ivtnetwork.com. We'll be back again next week with another great interview. Until then, stay healthy and safe.
The views and opinions expressed by the hosts, guests, or callers of this program do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe, the United Podcast Network, its partners, or affiliates.